There's a kind of freedom that no one warns you about. It arrives quietly, without fanfare, without a ceremony or a card signed by colleagues. It arrives in the silence after the noise stops. And most people, when they finally encounter it, mistake it for loss. That is the first great tragedy of aging. Not the body's betrayal, not the thinning of the social circle. The tragedy is misreading the gift. I want to talk to you today about what actually happens when you stop caring what people think. Not the motivational version of that sentence, not the version they print on coffee mugs. The real version, the strategic version, the version that the most powerful people in history understood and quietly weaponized, while the world around them continued performing for an audience that no longer mattered. Because here is what I've come to believe after decades of studying power, manipulation, and the long arc of human behavior. The opinions of others are a prison, and most people spend their entire lives decorating their cell, never realizing the door was never locked. A man wrote to me not long ago. He is 68 years old, retired, formerly a senior executive at a company whose name you would recognize. He had spent 40 years building a reputation, managing perceptions, calculating every word in every meeting, every handshake, every carefully constructed email. He told me that for most of his adult life, he had lived inside a performance, smiling at people he didn't respect, agreeing with positions he found intellectually offensive, softening his opinions to avoid friction, to preserve relationships that, in the end, dissolved the moment he cleared out his office. He said to me, "Robert, I wasted 40 years trying to be liked, and I ended up with nothing but a LinkedIn profile and a shelf of plaques no one looks at." I read that letter 3 times because I recognized something in it that I've seen across centuries of human behavior, across every culture and every era I have studied. The compulsive need for approval is not weakness. It is conditioning. It is what happens when society successfully convinces a person that their value is determined by the reactions of others. It begins in childhood. It is reinforced in school. It is perfected in the workplace. And by the time most people reach 60, it has become so deeply embedded that they cannot distinguish between what they genuinely think and what they have trained themselves to think in order to be accepted. This is not living. This is managed disappearance. The year is 1813. Napoleon Bonaparte stands at a window in Dresden, watching the rain fall on a city that will soon turn against him. He is 44 years old. He has conquered most of Europe. He has bent kings to his will and redrawn borders with his signature, and he is about to make the single greatest strategic error of his life, one that will end everything. He will pursue approval, not openly. Napoleon was too proud for open supplication, but he will make his decisions based on what others expect of him. He will launch campaigns to silence critics. He will extend his reach beyond what is strategically sound, because retreat would look like weakness, and weakness was something he could not allow the world to see. He had become, in his greatest years, a man governed by the image others held of him. His advisors tried to warn him. Marshal Caulaincourt, who had watched him for decades, said to him in private, and this is documented in his memoirs, "Sire, the campaign serves you glory, but not France." Napoleon smiled and said nothing. He already knew, but the opinion of history weighed heavier than the opinion of strategy. He was defeated, exiled, humiliated, and forgotten while still alive. A man who had once commanded the continent was reduced to pacing a small island, dictating memoirs to whoever would listen, spending his final years obsessed with how stop posterity his would judge him. The irony is almost unbearable. He spent his final decade doing exactly what he should have done throughout his career, not caring what they thought, but he arrived at indifference too late and from the wrong direction. He arrived at it from defeat, not from wisdom, and those are two entirely different countries. The lesson history offers us here is this. The moment a powerful person begins making decisions based on how those decisions will appear, rather than what those decisions will accomplish, that person has already begun to fall. The performance has consumed the performer, and this is exactly what happens to millions of people in their 60s and 70s, not on a geopolitical stage, in their own living rooms, in their relationships, in the way they spend their remaining hours. The performance continues long after the audience has stopped watching, long after anyone is keeping score. Now consider a very different figure. A man who understood deeply and early that the opinions of others were a resource to be managed, not a verdict to be obeyed. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man on earth in the 2nd century. He ruled over 60 million people at the height of the empire's reach, and yet his private journals, the ones we now call meditations, the ones he never intended for publication, reveal a man who spent extraordinary energy developing precisely this capacity, the ability to act without regard for external judgment. He writes, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He writes it to himself, not to Rome. He is not performing philosophy. He is practicing it in the dark, alone. After years of being watched by everyone, what strikes me about Marcus Aurelius is not his wisdom, though that is considerable. What strikes me is his timing. He reached philosophical indifference not at the end of his life, in comfortable retirement, but in the middle of it, while governing an empire, fighting wars on multiple frontiers, managing courtiers and enemies and betrayal. He used indifference as a governing tool. He used it as a source of clarity when everyone around him was pulling at his attention and demanding reactions. This is what most people misunderstand. Stopping the performance is not withdrawal from life. It is the beginning of genuine engagement with it. When you no longer spend half your mental energy monitoring how you appear, you suddenly have that energy available for what actually matters. Let me give this a name. Call it the law of deliberate withdrawal, not physical withdrawal, not hermitage, the deliberate withdrawal of your need for approval from the marketplace of other people's opinions. You stop trading there. You close the account, not because you become cold or indifferent to human connection. Genuine connection is one of the few things that matters, and I will come to that. But because you stop allowing the crowd's reaction to function as your compass. Here's how this law operates in practice for someone at your stage of life. You have spent decades accommodating, softening your speech for people who couldn't handle your real views, holding back observations because the room wasn't ready for them, choosing the polite response over the honest one because the honest one carried social risk, and in doing so, you have inadvertently communicated something devastating to the people around you, that their comfort matters more than your truth. This is why certain people no longer seek your counsel, not because you have nothing to offer, because they have never experienced you without the filter. They have never encountered your actual mind. They have only ever met the managed version of you. And managed people are not interesting. Managed people are not sought out. Managed people become pleasant enough presences that no one feels urgently compelled to call. The withdrawal of the performance is what creates presence, real presence, the kind that fills a room before you speak, the kind that makes people pay attention when you do. Starting from this moment, not as a resolution, not as a project, but as a recognition, you stop explaining your choices to your children, to your friends, to anyone. When someone asks why you did something, you answer if the question is genuine curiosity, and you offer nothing if it is disguised judgment looking for a foothold. Explanation is submission. You do not submit to tribunals. You never agreed to sit before. The second law is what I think of as the principle of invisible authority. Here's something that the history of power reveals with extraordinary consistency. The most formidable people in any room are almost never the loudest ones. They are the ones you cannot quite read, the ones whose reactions you find yourself monitoring, the ones whose approval you are, without quite realizing it, seeking. This is not mysticism, it is mechanics. The person who speaks least controls the interpretation of what is said. The person who reacts least forces others to fill the silence with their own anxiety. The person who requires the least validation from the room is, paradoxically, the one the room most wants to impress. Think of Cardinal Richelieu, the great architect of French power in the 17th century. He was not the king. He held no military command. He operated entirely through strategic silence, through the careful withholding of his real assessments, through a composure so complete that the most powerful people in France spent enormous energy trying to determine what he actually thought. That uncertainty was his power. He manufactured it deliberately. You can do this. You are, in fact, better positioned to do this now than at any earlier point in your life, because the social pressure that governs younger people, the desperate need to be seen, included, approved, has naturally begun to loosen its grip on you. What was once a struggle becomes available now almost as a natural condition if you choose to lean into it rather than fight it. Speak less, react less. Let people wonder. You have the authority of years behind you. Let it do its work without narrating it. The third law is the one that causes the most resistance, and so I want to be careful and precise about it. I call it the rule of chosen withdrawal from the performing self. Most people, as they age, continue performing a version of themselves that was constructed for an audience that no longer exists. The professional identity, the parental role as it existed when the children were young, the social persona crafted for a peer group that has since scattered or diminished. They keep the costume long after the play has ended. This is exhausting, and it is the primary reason that many people in their 60s and 70s feel a peculiar kind of fatigue, not physical, but existential. The fatigue of maintaining a performance for an empty theater. The move here is not to become someone new. It is to allow yourself to become more completely who you have always been. The opinions, the aesthetic preferences, the values, the ways of seeing the world that you edited out for decades, these are what return when you stop performing. And in my experience, both in my own life and in the study of people who have aged with genuine authority, this return is not a regression. It is an arrival. I want you to sit with this for a moment. You are sitting somewhere right now, perhaps in a chair you have sat in hundreds of times. The house around you carries the weight of years lived in it, the accumulated presence of people who came through these rooms and eventually left, some left in the ordinary way, some left in ways that still press against you when the light is low. Your phone is on the table. It doesn't ring the way it once did. The conversations are shorter now, more functional. The world has a new rhythm, and it does not quite include you at the center of it the way it once seemed to. You go somewhere, the pharmacy, the post office, the coffee shop, and you move through it without being truly seen, not because you are invisible, because you have chosen over a long period of time not to take up space. You edited yourself into smallness to make others comfortable, and now the smallness feels like your natural size, though it is not. Your children call sometimes on Sundays, and the call is warm, it is genuine, but somewhere beneath it, there is a dynamic you can feel without being able to name it. You are no longer the source of authority in their lives. You are now, at best, a resource, at worst, a responsibility. Neither of those feels like what you actually are, a person who has survived things they will not survive for another 20 years, who has knowledge that cannot be purchased or accelerated, who has earned through sheer duration a form of understanding that the world systematically undervalues. This is the trap, not aging itself. The trap is accepting the world's misreading of you as accurate. What if I told you that the strategic position you occupy right now, stripped of the performance, released from the hierarchy of the working world, free from the social calculations that consumed your middle years, is not a diminishment, it is a concentration, a power that has been diffused through an entire career of performance, impression management, and accommodation is now available to be recollected, gathered, applied with a precision that was never possible when you were younger and needed too many people to approve of you. This is not consolation. This is mechanics. This is how power actually functions in the long term. So here is what you do with this recognition. You choose one domain, one area of genuine mastery or deep interest, and you pursue it with the focused intensity of someone who understands that time is the only truly finite resource, not as a hobby, as a final shaping of what you leave behind. This is not about productivity. This is about the particular satisfaction of doing one thing with complete attention, without the fragmentation of a life organized around everyone else's needs. Leonardo da Vinci, in the final years of his life, was working on problems of fluid dynamics and human anatomy that no one in his time could fully appreciate. He wasn't working for an audience. He had moved beyond audience. He was working because the problems were beautiful to him, and because he had finally, in his old age, enough solitude and enough indifference to the opinions of patrons and critics to go as deep as he had always wanted to go. He died with notebooks full of work that the world wouldn't catch up to for 300 years. He died, I suspect, without apology. You will also stop explaining yourself. This is not arrogance. It is economy. Explanation implies that the other person's understanding of your choices is required for those choices to be valid. It is not. Your choices require your own assessment of their merit, and nothing beyond that. When you stop explaining, you signal, not aggressively, not coldly, but unmistakably, that you have passed the territory of needing permission and come out the other side. And finally, you will selectively withdraw your attention from people and situations that drain it without return, not dramatically, without announcement. The Stoics understood that the economy of attention is the only economy that truly matters. Where you direct your attention is where your life goes. After 60, this is not a philosophical preference. It is a practical necessity. Choose the connections that carry genuine weight. The ones where both people are seen, the ones where the conversation leaves you more alive than when it began. Everything else, the obligatory appearances, the maintained relationships that have calcified into habit, can be let go with neither guilt nor ceremony. There is a scene I return to often. The year is 180 AD. Marcus Aurelius is dying. He has ruled Rome for 19 years. He has spent those years at war, at court, in philosophical reflection, always at the intersection of action and thought. He is 62 years old, which was, in that era, a long life. He knows what is coming. His final days, by the account of Cassius Dio, were marked not by fear or by desperate attempts to hold on, but by a kind of deliberate completion. He called his son Commodus to his bedside, his disappointing, vain, pleasure-obsessed heir, and offered what counsel he could, knowing it would likely be ignored. Then he sent him away. He turned to the friends who remained, and he said simply, "Weep not for me. Think rather of the pestilence and the deaths of so many others." Then he covered his head and went to sleep, and did not wake. He died the way he had lived in his best years, without performance, without the need for witnesses, without requiring the world to acknowledge what he was leaving behind. He had written in his journals years earlier, "A man's life is a mere moment, his existence a flux, his perception clouded, his body's composition corruptible, his soul an eddy, his fortune unpredictable, his fame unclear. To put it simply, everything to do with the body is a river. Everything to do with the soul is a dream and vapor." And yet he showed up every day to the work, to the people, to the problems, not because he was certain of the outcome, because the doing was the thing itself, because he had stopped needing the approval of history, which cannot be known, and started serving the moment that was actually in front of him. You are still here. In that fact alone, there is more power than you have been allowing yourself to use. Stop waiting for the world to recognize what you carry. The world rarely does. The world is too busy performing its own anxieties to look up long enough to see what's actually standing in the room. The question is not whether they will see you. The question is whether you will, finally, after all of this time, fully see yourself and act accordingly. That is the freedom no one warned you about, not the absence of obligation, the presence, finally, of yourself, without apology, without performance, without the exhausting fiction that their opinion was ever the measure of your worth. It wasn't, it isn't, it never will be, and somewhere in your chest, in a place that has been very quiet for a very long time, you already knew that